Good evening, one and all. Today, on this 29th day of the last month of 2023, we all are here to witness knowledge, gain knowledge for a knowledgeable and important session on the topic Overview of Forensic Accounting and Investigation Standards, being organized by the Digital Accounting and Assurance Board of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Well, forensics and investigations. These two words take us to the era of 90s when we often used to hear these words in a very important crime sitcom. But with the increase in the scope of our services as chartered accountants, we also get to witness, we also get to experience the services we can provide in the financial era when these two domains. As professionals, we all know that every professional study requires to be complemented and supplemented by the setting up, study, and following of certain standards. That is what calls for today's topic, and we have eminent experts with us over here who will deliberate on their respective topics and give us insights into into this era of forensic and investigation standards. So to start with, we have our first eminent speaker present with us, CA Lokesh Chopra. CA Lokesh Chopra is a chartered accountant and he holds COP. He holds certification in forensic accounting and fraud detection and also certification in anti-money laundering laws with ICI. He has over 6 years of professional experience in forensic investigations, setting up FCPA compliance frameworks, risk-based internal audits, development of IFC framework, and standard operating procedures. He has delivered multiple training sessions for corporates on the forensic investigations, anti bribery, anti money laundering, anti corruption matters, with an very important objective to train investigation or compliance team members on the standard methodology to be followed for conducting investigations and to sensitize the employees on what should be done and what should not be done. He has also delivered trainings to ICAI and ICSI on forensic audits, use of technology in the investigations, and corporate governance framework. Wow. Has worked on conducting pre and post acquisition FCPA due diligence as well. And he's presently associated with one of the reputed big fours in their financially advisory practice, prior to which he was associated with India's leading conglomerate, where he was a member of corporate audit team responsible for execution of internal audits, enhancement of system level anti-fraud controls, special audits, IFC testing, and ensuring implementation of audit points by all the units and reporting to the senior management. Well, I'm sure that we'll get to know much on the topic for the day from him. So we welcome you, CA Lokesh Chopra, to address the and deliberate the participants. Please.
Thank you so much, Vipul, for such a warm welcome and such a hearty introduction. And thank you so much, ICI, for organizing this webinar. I think what Vipul alluded to, that forensic and investigation always go hand in hand. And what we have seen over the years is that we have standards in the auditing, which is statutory audit. We have standards in internal audit. But but ICI is the first one to bring up the standards in the forensic accounting and investigation assignments, which is a remarkable achievement, and we all should be proud of as a part of ICAI. Now, to start with, let me share my slides, and Vipul, let me know once it's visible.
It's visible.
Okay, great. So, first of all, and starting with a disclaimer that whatever I'll be presenting today, which is whatever we'll be discussing in the next 1.5 hour, these are not a views or opinion of any regulatory body, any legal body, or my employer. I don't the entire content mandatory, which have been made mandatory entire standard itself. But whatever discussion we might be having, I do not take any responsibility for the accuracy, applicability, and completeness of the content which we'll be discussing today. And I disclaim any and all liabilities to any party for any direct, indirect, implied, punitive, special, incidental, or any other consequential damages arising directly or indirectly from the use of the information or opinions. Because as a human being, we always form opinions, and that is where if anyone gets any impacted or there is any punitive liability because of whatever we discussed today, I disclaim myself from that. So that's a standard disclaimer. Now, going into now, when we when we talk about what is FAIS, so FAIS is basically forensic accounting and investigation standards. And how these have been laid out is that we first discussed what are the objectives of these standards, what is the overview, what is the preface, the framework, the basic principles, and one page summary of each of the standards. And that is how the entire compendium has been launched by the ICI. And this you can go on ICI's website and find it, or you can purchase from any of the ICI's nearest office. Now, it is very important to understand that why ICI came up with these standards. One is what we discussed, that in the other practices we already have, uh, 1 second, in the other practices we already, like in the statutory audit or in the internal audit or something like ISOs, we already have it. But forensic accounting and investigation has been one of the fields wherein there were no standards till date. So what ICI thought was that, okay, let's come up with certain best practices. Let's clarify what are the expectations and attributes which are expected from the chartered accountants or anyone who is conducting a FAI assignment. And we'll discuss about that, what is the applicability as on date for these standards. Is it applicable to the ICI members? Is it applicable to other members? We'll discuss about all those stuff. Then third is setting the common terminology, so that whenever you do these kind of FAI engagements, which is forensic accounting and investigation engagements, then what is the common terminology which we may be using or which we may want to use going forward in our reports. Like, because report is one of the standard deliverable which we give in any of the engagements we undertake. The common terminology example could be hypothesis, example could be fraud risk, and on each of these terminologies we have a separate standard altogether. Then the very important element is setting up the basic quality benchmarks, that okay, this is the minimum threshold which every professional needs to maintain whenever he or she is conducting any FAI engagements. And this is very important because all these assignments are, I would say, one is obviously the confidentiality is of utmost importance when we do these FAI engagements. And Vipul or Shubham or Jay, if I may know, what is the overall attendance we have up till now?
I think the board would be able to tell.
Okay, and if we can get a response of how many of these professionals, or if I'm not sure if articles are also there, but if there are articles or the professionals, how many of you have already conducted any type of FAI engagement till date?
Yeah, when you ask question, I might see the responses on screen. They'll have to type in
Okay.
the query session. So I can see the queries, but the attendance for the session, I think the board will be able to tell.
Sure, no worries, no worries. Let's proceed for the now.
Yeah.
Okay, then the next element, which is again linked back to the quality benchmark of service, which is harmonizing and improving the performance. Because when you lay down certain guidelines, now tomorrow, let's say a new CA gets qualified and he or she starts doing FAI engagement, then he'll know that he or she will already know that, okay, these are the minimum standards or these are the minimum benchmarks which I need to adhere, which could be in terms of engagement acceptance, engagement appointment, in terms of engaging an expert, in terms of communicating with the stakeholder. So they'll already have certain level of thresholds or certain level of benchmark up to which they'll be required to maintain documentation for any type of FAI engagement. And we all know that when we already have a set of guidelines for certain things, then the quality automatically improves. Then provide and guidance, again linked back to the same thing, set and evaluate level of performance and protect the ICI brand. Because largely, if you look at this field, which is forensic accounting and investigation, it is, as on date, it is predominantly these type of engagements are done by the chartered accountants. And that is why, because tomorrow, let's say any regulator picks up the report of any of these FI engagement, the regulator will appreciate that, okay, these are the standards which were there, and whosoever did this assignment, he has maintained or met all those expectations. Okay, moving on. Now, these are the various sections where, and we all would be aware of that we have similar concept in our standards of auditing. So what ICA has done in FAI standards also is they have divided into broadly into 7 sections. One is overarching, which talks about the overall framework, what are the basic principles, what are the basic expectations. Then we go into key concepts, which comprise of nature of engagement, the fraud risk, laws and regulations, applying hypothesis. Then we go into the 200 series, which talks about the engagement management, and this is the very important, the most important element. Obviously, all the elements are important, but one of the most important elements when we talk about all of these series, because if you do any goof up over here, then you will probably be facing consequences also. And this talks about engagement objective, engagement acceptance appointment, using the work of an expert, engaging with agencies, and the communication with stakeholders. Then is executing the assignments. First is planning. Then how do you maintain evidence documentation? Again, very important. Then how do you perform work procedures? How do you conduct interviews? Review and supervision, testifying before competent authorities. 400 is very specialized field, which one is data analytics. Then if you are doing any cyber fraud type of, or you want to gather data in a digital setup, then what are the best practices you need to adhere to? Then the loans and borrowings, which is mainly predominantly there in the financial services sector. And fourth, which is work in progress as of now by ICIS, related and connected parties, which is again related parties we all are aware of, because majority of the frauds, whatever we have been seeing up till date, happens like the money is siphoned through use of the related parties. Then 500 is on reporting the results. Again, a very important deliverable which is there in each of the FAI engagements, reporting results. And the last is quality control. So I'll be covering overarching documents, key concepts, and engagement management. The other 4 sections of executing assignments, specialized areas will be taken by my colleague Jodh Bakshi in the second half of the session. So moving on, and we have talked about the overarching document. So I'll directly dive into what these preface or these what this preface or the overarching documents talk about. So one is that, okay, there are certain principles which you need to adhere to, which are called the basic principles, which every FI professional needs to adhere to when they are conducting the FI engagement. Now, these standards are more of principle based, and these are not these will not guide you that, okay, this is how you need to do the data analytics. They'll only lay out certain best practices that, okay, these are the principles you need to follow. This is more of a guidance on what needs to be done. The how part, what ICA has done is they have launched the implementation guide also. So if you want to dive into any specific section of any of the FIIs, you can go into the implementation guide. You can read, which is again a recommendatory in nature. The FAI standard is mandatory. The implementation guide is recommendatory, because that teaches you that, okay, this is how you need to. Let's say, for example, let's talk about hypothesis. Then how you need to build up hypothesis, what is hypothesis, all those elements will be there in the implementation guide. But what are the documentation requirements, what is the objective of this particular standard, those are mentioned in the standard. Then okay, the right side of the screen, which is mandatory with effect from 1st of July 2023, if you as a chartered accountant, if you as a member of ICAI is conducting a FAI engagement, which is forensic accounting and investigation, and we'll dive into that, okay, how these definitions are separate. And there is one more concept of litigation support. We'll dive into all those 3 definitions in the upcoming slides. But The most important thing is that it is applicable to all the ICI members, whether you are in practice, whether you are in industry, whether you are working with any of the consulting firms. It is applicable to all. If anyone is doing a FAI engagement, it is applicable. If, and what it also talks, because of which you couldn't follow any FAIS. Think that okay, this was the FAIS, and I was not able to follow because of these certain limitations. An implementation guide we have already talked about, and as on date, and it's just a note by the ICI that as on date, we all know that FI engagements are being done by everyone, be it lawyer, be it company secretary, be it CWAs, be it MBAs. So right now, what ICI has done is it is because we do not have any because ICI as a body doesn't have authority over all the other professionals. So right now, ICI has done is it has made mandatory at least for the chartered accountants that if you are an ICI member, it is mandatory for you to follow these FIIs which have been laid down. But tomorrow there may be a situation that government comes up and says that government and regulator they may widely adopt it that okay, if anyone does any kind of FII engagements, it is mandatory for them to follow the FIIs which have been designed or devised by ICI. Okay. Now, and this is more of how these standards were set up. So DAB is basically Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. So what they did was they identified certain important topics, and going forward also. So it's not that okay, these are the standards which have been laid down and these are the final ones. No, ICA can always come up with certain additional standards tomorrow. So how they will do is that okay, tomorrow there is a new concept which comes in, or there is a new problem which arises in the market. That okay, when we are doing these FI engagements, this is a new problem for which we need a certain guideline. Then what the Accounting and Assurance Board will identify the topic, then the standard will be formulated. And how the standard will be formulated is basically there will be a study group to draft the standards. Those will be reviewed by DAB. Then it will be open for the comments by the general public for 30 days. And then it will be submitted to ICA Council. And then the council deliberates, they make amends, and then they approve finally the FIS. This was more to let you know that okay, there is a certain amount of effort which goes into when these standards are set up. Okay. So the basic framework, and we talked about there are certain basic principles, there are certain key concepts. Key concepts are more in terms of hypothesis, using the fraud risk, and the nature of the engagement. Then the standards, which are more in terms of that okay, engagement acceptance appointment, which we talked about, and then the engagement execution, the data analytics, the specialized areas, the reporting results, and then the guidance, which is the implementation guide. Now, what it does is the basic principle section defines forensic accounting and investigation and the litigation support also. Now, what is forensic accounting? Wherever there is any accounting related matter, and wherever your report needs to be testified or report needs to go before a competent authority, which could be SFIO, which could be any of the regulatory authorities, when the report needs to go before that competent authority, then it's a forensic accounting engagement. The investigation, which we do in general parlance, it's a systematic and critical examination of the records. It could be a violation of it could be a contractual violation, it could be a code of conduct violation, it could be anything. Wherever there is a predication that okay, something has gone wrong and it doesn't involve accounting related matter, then it will be termed as investigation. For example, cyber related frauds, it doesn't involve any kind of accounting matter. But when we talk about the financial statement frauds, when we talk about siphoning of funds, all those will fall into the forensic accounting type of assignments. Then every standard has a very fixed format. If you look at any of these standards which have been brought down by ICI, any of these 20 standards, they have a very fixed format. First will be introduction and scope. Second will be objective, the requirements, explanatory comments, the documentation of work procedures, and the effective date. Effective date as on like this will be very much relevant when any additional standard comes in. As on date for all the 20 standards we have, the effective date is 1st of July 2023. Okay. Now, what are the basic principles which have been laid down by ICI for all the professionals to adhere to? First is independence. And independence, as we all know, that whenever we engage for any assignment, or whenever we accept any assignment, it is very important for us to be independent. There shouldn't be any biasness in our minds when we are accepting, or there shouldn't be any interference or pressure when we are accepting that engagement, because that will ultimately impact the results or the deliverables. Second is integrity and objective. Integrity, again, it is, we all are professionals and we all know that we need to act in a highly ethical manner. If there is any conflict of interest that needs to be disclosed at the upfront, we should not be accepting those kind of assignments. We need to be very unbiased. There shouldn't be uh, any biasness towards a particular individual, towards a particular sector, or towards a particular gender also. Sometimes when we as a human being, when we do these kind of assignments, there may be a tendency that okay, he or she is uh, belonging to that caste. That biasness should not come when you are doing these kind of FAI engagement, because again, it will impact your deliverable. There shouldn't be contingent fee, because anything which has a contingent fee attached to it, will it will again impact your objectivity, because you'll not be objective. You will always try to go in one particular direction. The next is due professional care. Always exercise a reasonable care. Your attention should be there towards each of the minute details, and we all would appreciate, like at least the ones who have conducted FAI engagements till date, they'll appreciate how much important the attention is, or how much important the observation skills are. Sometimes a very very minute detail, or a very uh, minute thing may give you clues, or may give you a direction that okay, and which will ultimately help you in cracking the entire case. Then professional care also involves compliance to the professional standards which have been laid out, and the continuous communication. Continuous communication could be with the primary stakeholders, could be with other stakeholders. In case you are not getting enough support, then raise it to the higher authorities. In case you are having any limitations, raise it to the appropriate stakeholders. The next, again, confidentiality. I should not be telling you again and again that whatever we do, and especially these forensic accounting and investigation engagements, any information which you gather during the course of the engagement should be highly, you should always ensure that it is kept highly confidential. It should only be what we tell in general parlance is need to know basis. If someone needs to know, then only you should disclose it. You should not be spreading out the information everywhere. And confidentiality also is that sometimes when you are in public, you might be discussing certain cases, which again may impact the overall result of the engagement. What There is this one of the case. What happened was, there was one of the partner who was traveling on a flight, and he was preparing a report. He, sorry, he was not preparing report. He was preparing the interview questionnaire of one of the individuals, and as the luck would have it, that individual was just sitting next to him. And the next day, he did not turn up for the interview. So it's always very important that you keep these matters private. You don't, if you want to work in a flight, use your privacy screens, or the need to know basis. Then the skills and competence. Keep updating yourself, because there might be certain kind of engagements in which you will need a particular skill set, like valuation, like the market intelligence, because market intelligence, the discrete inquiries which are done, those are, that is a very specialized. One is a continuing professional education which one needs to adhere. But whenever you accept any FI engagement, always ensure that you are putting the best team on that FI engagement. You analyze that okay, this is the job which needs to be done in these engagement. It involves a valuation, so probably I'll need someone who has experience in valuation. If it needs a market intelligence, then probably I'll need someone who has already done certain kind of discrete inquiries. Then the contextualization of situation. Now contextualization is important, because you need to understand, whenever you start or whenever you initiate any FAI engagement, it is very important that you understand the nature of the business. What is the complexity which this engagement involve, how you need to, and it will also help you in designing the work procedures. And there'll always be a predication. So basis that predication, or basis, there'll always be certain red flags, right? So basis those red flags, you need to imagine of the situation that okay, this is how I need to plan my entire engagement. Then the primacy of truth, another reality. Any FI engagement is just a fact finding exercise. We are not there to give opinions. And it is very clearly laid out that you can conclude an assignment basis whatever facts you have gathered, basis whatever evidences you have gathered. It is not your responsibility as a FAI professional to give an opinion on that, okay, he or she is a culprit or not. It's not our roles and responsibility. Then respecting rights and obligation, again with the new data privacy law which has come in, it's very important that we respect everyone's right, we respect everyone's obligations whenever we are conducting these engagements. There's one more concept which is principle of natural justice. Whosoever the other party is, give them a chance of being heard. They might have their side of story, so you need to hear their side of story also before concluding or before wrapping up on the engagement. Then separating facts from opinion, already talked about that. Our job is just fact finding, and you can build hypothesis, you can discover evidences basis those hypotheses, and basis that you need to identify the facts or the evidences which either proves the allegation or it disproves the allegation. And the next is quality and continuous improvement. Always focus on quality, which is again basis your factual authenticity. Validate the accuracy of whatever you have written in your report, and then improve the quality of the report. Improvement is a continuous process. Keep improving on the qualities. Okay, moving on. So now we'll start with the series 100 standards, which is one is nature of engagement, which talks about that what are the different type of engagements which are covered under these standards. Second is the fraud risk. 130 is laws and regulations. 140 is applying hypothesis. So when we dive into nature of engagement, so there are three type of engagements. We have already talked about forensic accounting and investigation. The next one which we'll talk about is litigation support. Forensic accounting, which I mentioned previously also, that wherever it involves a financial transaction or accounting related matter, then it will fall into forensic accounting. Investigation, which is again a critical examination of any facts, records, documentation, and other form of evidences for a specific purpose. It could be a legal violation, it could be ethical violation, or it could be a contractual violation. Litigation support, wherever you are acting as a mediator or wherever you are supporting in the disputes, there may be certain disputes wherein either the regulator or the arbitral tribunal or the client may want you to come and provide a valuation report. So those kind of assignments are or engagements are litigation support engagements. Now, what is the objective? Why ICI came up with or what was the need of this standard? Because you may say that everyone knows that what is the type of engagement we are doing. First is that when you are aware of the type of engagement you are doing, then it will help you devise the scope and approach accordingly. Because if it's a forensic accounting, then probably your focus would be more on the financial statements, your focus would be more on testing the transactions, that okay, let's test a document. What is there in the documentation? Is my hypothesis getting proved or not? If it's a litigation support engagement, obviously it will be based on what you need to do, but then it will also include testifying before the competent authority. The next is the nature of engagement will also help you identify that what are the type of resources, or what are the type of skill sets you need for completing this engagement. Okay. Now, you would note that there is a word audit highlighted on the screen. Now, we are not calling anywhere a forensic audit, because audit, when it comes to mind, it's basically providing opinion on the true and fair view, whether the finance, and what we all have been hearing up till date is that, okay, you test certain thing and you provide a true and fair view. That is why, to avoid that confusion, or to avoid those misconceptions, what we are not so what the standard says is that you should not be using the word audit anywhere. You should be calling it as a forensic accounting engagement and not the forensic audit engagement. Now, the standard also calls out for certain documentation requirements. One is that there'll be certain documentation, or there'll be certain fraud risk indicators basis which you would have got the engagement, or which the primary stakeholder or the client might have shared with you when you when he asked you that, okay, you please provide your approach and methodology, or you please provide your proposal or the quotation for conducting these type of engagements. So those red flag needs to be documented, and whatever these initial correspondences are there, or the initial meetings with the minutes of meetings with these stakeholders, whatever you are doing in finalizing the nature of the engagement, those needs to be documented as a part of the requirement of this standard. Okay. So forensic accounting, we talked about, and what are the type of services which will fall into the forensic accounting is, one is financial statement, we talked about the fund diversions, anti-money laundering, license your tax evasion sort of engagements in which you may be appointed. Largely, you are appointed by the government authorities. Then the related party transactions or the valuation related engagements, the estimations of loss or damages, and the suspicious transactions under IBC, that will also fall under the forensic accounting services. Then investigation, what are the nature of services about? Any insurance or the personal injury claims for which you are either appointed by the company, or you are appointed by the insurance agency, that okay, you come and validate what is the quantum of loss which has happened, or what is the amount of insurance which needs to be paid out. The code of conduct violation, which could be a procurement fraud, which could be any of those behavioral frauds, all that. Then the whistleblower complaints. Most of the organizations, at least the MNCs today, have a whistleblower channel in their organization. So whatever complaints they receive through the whistleblowing mechanism, that will fall under the investigation service. Asset theft, bribery, corruption, data breach, theft of intellectual property. The litigation support, we talked about that either you are appointed by a arbitral tribunal, or you are helping two parties in a dispute matter to arrive at the final amount which needs to be paid by one party to the other party. And again, it's entirely based on the facts or the circumstances of the case. Okay. Moving on now, second is the fraud risk. We all have heard of the concept fraud. We all have heard of the concept risk. Now, why fraud risk is important is because when you start any sort of engagement, it's important that you list out that okay, these are the areas wherein I'll focus in the start, or these are the areas wherein my majority of the energies will be diverted to, because that is where I'll find the maximum, or I'll get the maximum output, or that is where I should be headed to instead of heading to another direction. And generally, how do you identify the fraud risk is that you need to have a strong understanding of the process. So once you do a process walkthrough, and process walkthrough is you sit with the person who is doing that job. You understand that okay, what are the controls they exercise on a day-to-day basis, pick up any of the recent transaction and understand that okay, these are the controls they exercise, and then identify that okay, if this process is being followed, then where are the loopholes? If there is a big loophole, that is where you need to invest your energies, or you need to focus your energies. And the key provisions or the key requirements is that you conduct a preliminary fraud risk understanding, which we talked about, that you understand that okay, this is how the process is followed. Then you prioritize your work accordingly, that okay, these are the fraud risks I have identified. Let's talk about procurement. So procurement, it could be ghost vendors, it could be purchase of material on excessive prices. And once you understand the entire process, then you identify that okay, this is the risk, uh, which could be the likelihood and the impact of which risk is the highest. That is the area wherein you need to focus more. And likelihood is basically how frequently that risk can occur in the organization, and the impact is, it could be in monetary, it could be in the terms of reputation, it could be in terms of any other sort of impact also. So, and the last is that whatever you the last is basically, when you report the findings, give a due consideration that okay, this is how the fraud risk were identified. Now the now this standards also talk about the documentation, but the documentation it talks about is that you give an understanding of the fraud risk, how it is applicable to the engagement, how did you identify that fraud risk, what was the likelihood, what was the impact of that fraud risk, and then how you address those fraud risk when you were conducting your FI engagement? How did you ensure that, okay, if the risk is the ghost vendors, then what are the procedures you perform to ensure that there are no ghost vendors? Or if there are ghost vendors, then also what are the procedures you perform? So all those should be eventually reported into your into your final report. Okay. So we have, I think we have talked about all this. Next is laws and regulations. Now, and because these engagements are highly sensitive in nature, and most of the times these end up in the court of law. So it is very important for the professional to understand what are the laws and regulations which will be applicable whenever he or she is doing any type of engagement. For example, if you are doing a money laundering engagement, then there'll be certain RBI circulars which will be applicable on you. There'll be certain PMLA guidelines which will be applicable on you. If you are doing, for example, a mining related investigation you need to perform, then you need to be aware of what are the mining related provisions or what are the mining related acts for which you may engage an expert also. You may get a legal advice also, but it is important to it is important for you to know that, okay, if I am doing this sort of engagement, that what are the laws and regulations which will be applicable. And once you identify that, okay, these are the laws and regulations which will be applicable, then whatever you do during your FI engagement, that has to be in compliant with those laws and regulations. Even your work procedures. For example, I'll talk about when you do like as an investigator, we are not authorized to do surveillance, right? Because we are not the enforcement agencies, we are not the polices of the world. We are just a plain investigator. We are just a corporate investigator. You can do discrete inquiries, but those also, in those discrete inquiries also, it is important for you to remember that you should never reveal your sources, that, okay, this is the person I spoke to from whom I got this sort of information. That is very, very important. Then you have data privacy guidelines. Now let's say the client comes and asks you that, okay, I need to get his personal bank statement. As a professional, you need to tell them that, okay, it says it says PII, personally identifiable information, and not even PII, it's a SPII, sensitive personally identifiable information, which we cannot get access to unless the individual himself provides us that bank statement. So whatever engagement we are doing, whatever work procedures we are doing, those have to be in compliance with these laws and the regulations which have been laid out. The next example is, so sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, now you're audible. Audible, Yukichi.
So sorry, there was some network glitch. Yeah, I'll put up my screen again, 1 second. I hope the screen is visible.
It's visible.
Okay. So it's very important that we identify what are the laws or what are the regulations which will be applicable whenever we are doing these sort of FI engagements. And it will also help you in driving a process driven approach. Or what you can do is that you can draw a checklist that, okay, this is how I need to these are the provisions, or these are the provisions of the law which will be applicable when I'll be doing the FA engagement. And then you keep taking that, okay, this is the provision I've complied with, this is the provision I've complied with. And then the most important is the principle of natural justice, which we have talked about, that you need to give other party also the opportunity of being heard. If you're not giving that, then probably the outcome will not be as great as it should be. Then the documentation which needs to be maintained under this is again the checklist of all the applicable laws. If you're doing a PMLA, then what are the laws which will be applicable on that money laundering engagement? You list out those provisions, and that needs to be documented in your working papers. The second is what are how you have ensured the compliance to those requirements. That also has to be documented. Then the chain of custody. Now, chain of custody is applicable on the electronic data as well as the hard copy data which you acquire during the course of investigation. You need to maintain that entire chain of custody, that okay, this is how the information has moved from one hand to the another. The last is, if there is any deviation from any of the laws and regulation or any of the provision which was ideally applicable on your engagement, then you need to document that also. Okay. The next is applying hypothesis. Now, first, let's understand what is hypothesis. Hypothesis is basically forming certain scenarios that, okay, if this is the engagement, then either it could and for example, let's take a whistleblower complaint which comes to you and says that, okay, there is a there is a conflict of interest in your organization, and there is a procurement head who is favoring a particular set of vendors. Now, the hypothesis could be that either he's getting an instruction from someone, either the allegation is true, either the allegation is incorrect, or if the conflict of interest is there, then how that conflict of interest can be present in that scenario. That also uh, and in a simple plain vanilla language, it is basically the modus operandi, how he or she could have done that fraud. That is what needs to you need to think of those scenarios, and then you need to design your work procedures accordingly. And when you start your engagement, you build up, let's say, four scenarios. It is and these hypotheses are evolving in nature. It's not that if I form, let's say, four hypotheses in the start, those four hypotheses I should either prove or disprove. There may be certain hypotheses which may not even be applicable when you proceed in the engagement, but there may be certain new hypotheses. There is certain information when you are reviewing the documentation, there is certain new information which came up. Basis that there may be a new direction which might help you uncover the entire case. So it's a ever evolving. Whenever you are doing the FI engagement, till the during the entire course, you need to keep thinking of that, okay, is there additional hypothesis which has come in? Okay, whatever procedures I am doing, this procedure is linked to which hypothesis? Is that hypothesis getting proved? Is that hypothesis getting disproved? Now, again, the documentation, again, it's more in terms of what were the hypotheses which you built up, and then what was the result of the hypothesis, whether it got accepted, whether it got proved, or whether it got disproved. Okay. Moving on to next series, which is the 200 series, and it's engagement management. So starting with first is engagement objectives. That what is the objective of any of the engagement you are undertaking. Second is engagement acceptance and appointment. That what are the things you need to do whenever you are accepting an engagement. Third is using the work of an expert, because there may be certain scenarios, or there may be certain situations in which you will have to engage an expert. For example, it could be handwriting, it could be voice analysis,
Recording
define
in
your scope of
progress.
work. Define that, okay, this is the objective I tend to achieve when I'll be doing this engagement. And objective is not outcome, that okay, I'll be proving the hypothesis or I'll be proving the allegations. That's not the objective. Objective is that, okay, objective would be either to prove the allegations or disprove the allegations. That is the objective. Then the purpose and the scope, you agree for that, and the expected outcome is discussed with the primary stakeholders, that this is a report I'll be providing to you, and these are the things which will be there in the report. Documentation, again, if we dive into that, on what basis you decided on the nature of the engagement, your initial correspondences, your minutes of the meetings, and if there is any amendment also. Like there may be certain engagements in which you start with that, okay, this is the investigation engagement in which I'll be either proving or disproving the allegations which have been noted or communicated by the management. But as you move forward, management may want you that, okay, uh, let's say they want to file a FIR against that individual, and that FIR will tomorrow you'll be required to testify before the competent authorities or the court. Then it will turn into a litigation support engagement. So all those amendments also needs to be documented, and who will have access to the report. That is also very important. Whether it will only be a client or it will be third parties also, or it could be a lender, it could be any of the regulatory authorities also. So those needs to be documented. All these nature of services we have already talked about: forensic accounting, investigation, and the litigation support. Now the next is engagement acceptance and appointment. Vipul, am I audible?
Yes, Lokesh, you're audible. You're audible.
Great. Okay. The next is engagement acceptance and appointment. So every engagement has certain kind of sensitivity, and there is an inherent risk in each type of engagement. There are certain self-review threats which we, let's say, and as a principle, we all know that if you are a statutory auditor, you cannot do certain management services, and similarly, if you are a statutory auditor, you cannot perform forensic services also. So there are certain kind of inherent risks whenever you accept any kind of engagement. It is very important for you to recognize that, or to perform those checks, that am I independent enough. And the objective of this entire exercise is that, am I independent enough to perform this job? And the way in which it could be conducted is, one is the preliminary procedures before you accept the engagement, and then you do a detailed due diligence also, that okay, these are the things I need to adhere to when I'm getting appointed. The preliminary procedures are more in terms of, you check whether there is a conflict of interest, what's the risk profile of the client, what is the skill set I'll need for this engagement. Sorry. What is the skill set I'll need, and then eventually, once you have analyzed all the risk and you see that, okay, there is no risk, or there is no independence, my independence is not getting hampered if I accept this sort of engagement, then you eventually get into you sign an engagement letter or a contract or a letter of award with the client. And you also sign an NDA also, because again, going back to the concept of confidentiality. Then when you do a when you do a detailed due diligence, it's more in terms of that, okay, what is the skill set I'll need, whether there is any relationship or any shareholding in that, in the either the target entity or the primary entity for which I am conducting the investigation. So those are certain scenarios you need to evaluate whenever you are accepting these kind of engagements. And then again, going back to the concept that there shouldn't be any contingent fee, because if there is a contingent fee, then you'll be biased towards a certain decision. And then the last part, which is very important, is the engagement letter. Now there are certain guidance, or there is certain recommendation which ICI has given in terms of engagement letter in the format, which is, who is the contracting party, what is the scope of the engagement, what is the description of the deliverable, what is the timeline you need to adhere to, what will be the responsibilities of the client, what will be the responsibility of the investigator or the FA professional, what is the fees, what will be the governing law, how the contract can be terminated. It could be a force majeure or a general termination clause. And then what is the engagement team? If you will be using the third party resources, then how those will be used, whether you'll be giving reference of those third party resources in your eventual report or not. And then what will be the mode of communication. So these are certain guidelines or recommendations which are being given by ICI in terms of the engagement letter format and the content of the engagement letter. Okay. The next is using the work of an expert. Now, again, why do you need to use the expert? So there are certain scenarios wherein, let's say, you want to get the handwriting validated, or you want to get the voice validated of someone. Therein, you will have to engage the external party because we are not experts in that. If you're holding that qualification, well, good enough, you can do that. But if you're not holding that qualification, then you cannot give a comment that okay, this handwriting doesn't pertain to Lokesh. There's not Lokesh's handwriting. You need a handwriting expert for that. And for engaging that expert and for using the work of that expert, there are certain principles which have been again laid down in this particular standard. That first is, uh, you need to be aware that what are their credentials. Are they independent enough? Are they qualified enough to do that job? Then what is the previous feedback about that expert? You can do discussions with the other professionals. You can either have a personal experience, or you can inquire in the market. You can inquire on the public domain. Then you have a discussion with the expert also to assess that okay, what is the level of knowledge, or if he or she understands that what is that we are trying to achieve out of this particular engagement. And then the last is obviously a self certification by the expert. And then once you are confident enough that okay, this expert is good enough to be engaged for this type of work, then you define the scope and the expected deliverables, which would again be in the form of a letter of engagement, which you will be signing with that expert, that okay, this is the objective you want to achieve, this is going to be the scope of your engagement, this is the confidentiality clause, these are the non disclosure agreements, these will be the reporting authorities, because eventually that expert needs to report into you because you will be using the work of that expert. If that expert is not being appointed by you, then also it's your responsibility to determine that okay, was the scope of work comprehensive enough, and second is, was the expert qualified enough to give that particular report or to give that particular judgment or conclusion. And then what will be the nature of deliverables, what are the permissions in the waiver you need, and if you need to, and there may be a retention clause also. So either the working papers can be retained by you, or the working papers can be retained by the expert himself. And let's say tomorrow if the evidence needs to be presented before the competent authority, then you need to see whether those evidences will be presented by the expert himself or herself, or it needs to be presented by the FII professionals. All these needs to be done in a written contract. And then when the engagement is progressing, during the course of the engagement also, or during the like till the time the expert is performing the work, keep having regular conversations with them to see that they are not missing on anything, whatever sources they are using, those are reliable enough, any assumptions they are using, or if there are any limitations also, those are very very important, because those limitations will eventually form part of your report also. And then if there is any conflict of interest or not again, and then I think that's all in yeah, that's all in using the work of an expert. The next is engaging with the agencies. So it could be a law enforcement agency with whom you might be engaging as a part of your, and it can also be in two ways. One is the regulatory agency is asking you to help them in conducting a certain assignment. Let's say tomorrow SFIO calls you, SFIO or ED or MCA calls you that okay, you come and help us investigate this particular case. Or they might ask you and say that okay, I need support in discovering the digital data. The other scenario could be that okay, whatever work you have performed on a particular case, the regulatory authority may ask you to come and testify that okay, how did you perform those work procedures, how did you what is the documentation you had, on what basis you reached the conclusion. So these are the two ways in which you can be engaging with the, or you may be engaging in the with the agencies. So this standard talks about that okay, there are certain protocols. One is obviously the independence, and then the due professional care. There are certain legal aspects also which needs to be adhered to when you are dealing with these agencies. Then what are the roles and responsibilities, and then what are the special consideration? These are the things which the standard talks about. So what it says is that you get an engagement of letter signed whenever you are engaging with the agencies. It could be either with the client directly. So let's say you are going to represent on behalf of the client, then the engagement letter has to be with the client. But if you are engaging, or if you are getting engaged directly by the law enforcement authority, then your engagement letter has to be directly with that authority. The letter of appointment, and again the letter of appointment needs to have all those clauses which we talked about. And then let's say tomorrow you are interacting with SFIO, you need to understand that what are the laws and regulations which are applicable, or what are the laws and regulations which governs that respective agency. Then basic principles: independence, integrity, objectivity, confidentiality. And again, whosoever is a team member who is working along with you, they also need to adhere to these kind of principles. For that, you can get an NDA signed or a confidentiality agreement signed with those team members. And then due professional care, which again we talked about. So the in terms of documentation, what you need to do is, one is a chain of custody for the physical or digital evidence which will be presenting. Let's say the enforcement agency wants you to come and discover the digital data. You need to have the chain of custody, you need to have the engagement letter, you need to have an NDA with the professional as well as the team members, and then retention of all the correspondences, including reports and the working papers which are there in either the physical form or the digital form. So these are the indicative list of agencies. When we talk about law enforcement, it's CBI, ED, EOW, SFIO, Income Tax Investigation Department, GST Intelligence Department. Regulatory, it could be RBI. Let's say there is a loan siphoning of case, you may be engaged by RBI. SEBI, in case the securities fraud, you may be engaged by a SEBI. IRDI, insurance related cases. IBBI, we all know, we have heard of so many bankruptcy cases in which you go for identifying PUF transaction, which is preferential, undervalued, extortionate, and the fraud transactions. The last one is communication with the stakeholders. Now, communication with the stakeholders, there are certain principles, and these principles are more in terms of, okay, who is going to be your primary stakeholder, who is going to be your secondary stakeholder. With the primary stakeholder, you need to have, or you need to do certain kind of communication. It could be, for example, we talked about that, okay, you are defining the nature of the engagement. That nature of engagement communication will be with the will be with the primary stakeholder. Then your engagement letter related communication, those will be with the, again those will again be with the primary stakeholders. The standard also talks about that what is the need for the communication, so that you have everything documented. Whatever is important is documented. Whatever is important is documented. Then how to communicate? Use the pre-established communication protocols. Now, what is pre-established? There may be certain communication protocols which you will document in your engagement letter, that okay, uh, if I need to do a certain level of escalation, this is the authority I need to reach out to. Or if I need to provide the report, then the report needs to go to X party or the Y party. So those communication protocols, there may be certain pre-decided which are there in the engagement letter. There may be certain afterwards also, like once you initiate the engagement, there may be certain protocols. Then what to communicate, nature, and what needs to be communicated, how it needs to be communicated, and focusing on the significant matters. So, okay, I think we have. Okay, so this is the last slide. So now, what the standard is divided is, so there are certain essential matters and there are certain significant matters, and there's a very thin line of difference between these two, and that is why it has been very clearly documented in the standard itself. So the scope and methodology of the engagement, there's a very essential matter which needs to be documented, or which needs to be communicated with the stakeholders. Protocol of communication, laws and regulations applicable on the engagement, support and cooperation required, engagement fee, periodic reporting, and the reporting format. The significant matters which you would want, or which any FI professional would want to document during the course of the FI engagement, is One is if there is any lack of cooperation by certain set of stakeholders, which is causing significant delays in the engagement. So those should be very properly documented, because ultimately you will be inserting that as a limitation in your report, so that work paper has to be there. If there is any prevention of access, or certain level of individuals are withholding the information, that also has to be documented. If there is any potential conflict of interest with any stakeholder, like during the course of engagement you identify any new suspect with whom you have a conflict of interest, now that needs to be communicated to the stakeholders, that okay, with this particular individual I have a conflict of interest, I may not be able to proceed further. Then any kind of evidences which may be destructed by someone, if that has happened during the course of your engagement, like let's say tomorrow, not tomorrow, yesterday you saw some evidence which was present in one of the, either in one of the offices or in one of the files, but today when you go, those evidences are not there. So that also has to be very clearly documented. If there is any break in chain of custody of the evidence, let's say evidence you had kept in your possession, or it was there in let's say any of the team's position, it could be information technology team. So if there is, and you are not able to find that particular evidence, like when you gave it to the information technology team, but tomorrow it was returned back to you by let's say a sales team member, there is a certain lag between, or I would say there is a break in the chain of custody. Then any safety or life threatening situations, those also are the significant matters which needs to be documented. Okay, so yeah, Vipul, we are covered with all the, with the first, with the first half of the session.
Well, right, Lokesh, that's what quite informative. We have certain queries in the link session. If you could answer them, I'll read out to
Sure.
you that queries to you. Just give me a sec. Okay. There's this person who's asking, while investigating economic offenses, if
Hmm.
investigating agencies engage chartered accountants for their professional opinion, whether such opinion is a good evidence against the culprit.
So again, going back to the same concept, that we are there to find the facts. We are not there to provide the opinions. Even if we act as a, whenever we act as an expert witness also. So whatever you present or testify before a competent authority, that is always supported by the facts. You are doing a fact-finding exercise. You are not providing opinions.
Okay, right. I hope that the gentleman got his answer.
Yeah, in case there is any follow-up also, we can take that. And Jyoth is also here. And Jyoth, if you want
Yeah,
to add anything.
No, thank you. So, I think we have a separate standard FAIS 360, as Lokesh mentioned, on this. So, I think once we go through that, probably if there is any follow-up, we can again take that up.
great, 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 great. Well, thank you so much, Lokesh, for that informative session. We covered the standard setting process, nature of engagements, use of experts, and especially my personal favorite, engagement with agencies, whether law enforcement or regulatory agencies. So I suppose the query was also on the same, and I hope in the next session we'll get to know more about that part. So, well, thank you so much, and would like to extend our welcome to the next eminent speaker of the day, C.A. Jyot Bakshi. So, C.A. Jyot Bakshi is a chartered accountant, is the founder of Mrs. J. Bakshi and Company, Chartered Accountants. He has worked on all sorts of engagements like forensic accounting, investigations, transaction audits under IBC, corporate intelligence, due diligence, diligence checks, and whistleblower assistance. So he cleared his chartered accountancy in May 2018 and was with worked with one of the reputed firms in risk forensic practice at Mumbai for almost 2 years before founding the firm Mrs. J. Bakshi and Company. Is directly coordinated for investigations with representatives of SFIUM Office Mumbai, Economic Offences Wing Mumbai, Local Crime Branch Gandhinagar, and CBI ACB Gandhinagar. I suppose Jyoth would act like the CA Pradyuman to our the ACP Pradyuman to the CA wing. Then ventured into the forensic area from the very early post qualification days and has been an avid learner and student of this field and has core on-field experience in this niche domain. He is also a sustainability and ESG enthusiast and wishes to engage in developing contemporary solutions to direct organizations toward enhanced environmental, social, and governance related causes. To add to his profile, he's delivered 23 plus training sessions on forensics across 10 plus organizations. And those organizations include ICAI, universities, federations, and colleges, and also address 75 plus sessions to officers of a regulatory investigation agency. As a student, also, he has plethora of achievements, presented papers at various ICA student conferences on diverse technical topics between the year 2016 and 17. And at a milestone achievement, he had represented India at the Asia Pacific Children Convention, a student cultural exchange program, and Fukuoka, Japan, from Junior Chamber International in the year 2008. I suppose the list is endless. I might have to cut so that we get to hear from him. We get the insights he's brought through his topic for today. So the that is all yours, Jyot. We extend you a grand welcome over here.
Thank you so much, Vipulji, for such a elaborate introduction. First, let me just understand: am I audible clearly, and am I visible properly?
Yes, both visibility and audibility, all clear.
Great, great. So, once again, thank you so much, Vipulji, for such an elaborate introduction. And I'll be very modest. I mean, that comparison with ACP sir is, I mean, thank you so much for that. Once again, I would like to extend gratitude towards Nanda sir, Dayanivas sir, Chairman, Vice Chairman, DAB, and the complete DAB team. As well, would like to extend a great acknowledgement and appreciation to Lokesh for deliberating on series 100 and 200. Having said that, we can start with the next 300, 400, and the 500 series. I'll just share my screen. Vipulji, just confirm if once you are able to see the screen.
Sure. It's visible.
Visible now, right?
Yes.
Great. So, as we've already covered 100 and 200 series, now we move on to yeah, just a minute. Yeah. So now that we've known 100 and 200 series, 300 series talks about how do we actually go about executing the assignments. If you so if we read the series title very clearly, it talks about executing assignments. The word used is assignment. We will delve into as to why it is assignment. So it is about executing the assignment, the 300 series. 400 series talks about some of the specialized areas, that is digital evidence gathering, data analytics, loans or borrowings. So the 400 series talks about that. 500 series then talks about reporting and quality control. So all in all, these are the three themes that we wish to go about. I believe if we have some questions during the discussion, we will have it in the chat box, and then Vipulji would have it for me to answer at the end. If there are any follow-up questions on the earlier two series, feel free to post them as well. We'll try my best to answer to them as well. So on that note, let us begin with the 300 series. Now over here there are 6 standards. 310 talking about planning the assignment, as to how do we actually go about sharpening our axe before we start chopping the tree, is what it typically talks about. 320, the heart and soul of the FAIS, as we would understand it to be, evidence and documentation. Without evidence, without relevant and reliable evidence, without adequate documentation, adequate appropriate documentation, whatever we do might end up into a mere futile exercise. So 320 talks about evidence and documentation. 330 again very supplementary to 320, and how do we actually go about gathering, collecting evidence and documentation. So conducting work procedures, conducting interviews, 340 following work procedures. Then how do we go about undertaking our review, maintaining that, upholding the quality and maintaining the kind of documentation and the requirements that all of these standards mandate. And 360 about as Lokesh was mentioning, testifying before a competent authority. So all in all, these are some of the facets of execution. So we can start with 310. As I said, there is a specific name to the series execution of the assignments. And why not engagement? So there is a this is the standard where there is a clear demarcation and distinguishing. It is distinguished as to what is an engagement vis-a-vis what is an assignment. So engagement is, I mean, if engagement is a father, assignment is a son. Something, I mean, assignment is a subset of engagement. Assignment on an overall contractual mandate level, something that is directly with the primary stakeholder, that is an engagement. Whereas assignment is part or portion of the overall engagement. So let's say if we are if we are undertaking a investigation on a suspected employee misconduct, and there is a requirement to extract digital evidence from the electronic devices. So and let's say if we are engaging an expert to do that, or as Lokesh was also mentioning, we might want to do some kind of voice analysis or signature verification, and we are probably not the best suited professionals to do that, but we have a specialized expert to do it. So let's say if we are engaging or appointing an expert to do some kind of specialized work, the portion or the part of that work would be termed as an assignment. Whereas the overall mandate, that is to investigate into the merits and I mean merits or otherwise of the suspicion on the whistleblower complaint of the employee misconduct, would overall at an overall level be the engagement. So this we need to be uh, very particular and precise when we go about using these terms, that is engagement and assignment. So we don't want to end up using them interchangeably, saying we are doing an assignment, we are doing an engagement, because the roles and responsibilities for us would differ if we are doing so. Let's say tomorrow we as professionals, we as forensic professionals only might be doing an assignment which is part of a larger engagement. In that case, our roles and responsibilities would be different. So because the mandate is not probably in our name, but we are probably only doing a piece of the engagement, and that is why as an assignment we are supposed to do a certain things and report to the actual professional who has got the engagement. And that's how we would have a subset liability. We would have to maintain certain documentation, we would have to report certain things. While if we are doing an engagement, and if we've given something to an expert or other professional which is an assignment, then our responsibility is different, where we have to uh, as much as we've given some assignment to an expert, it still is our responsibility at the end of the day to have that kind of documentation with us. It is we who have to give a clear reporting on if we are accepting or agreeing with the results or the evidence identified with the expert that was appointed. So let's say an expert is coming up with an assessment or is coming up with some evidence, but and is coming up with some modus operandi, and probably we are not agreeing to that. So if we are in the position of who has gotten engagement, then we need to adequately what was it that the expert has identified, what is the conclusion, what is the assessment, what is the evidence documentation gathered by the expert. And if we are not agreeing to a certain point, we need to again specifically mention. So that is where understanding and engagement and assignment is very important at this point in time before we move further ahead. So, and now going on to the key provisions, we need to make sure that we follow a process. At the end of the day, things cannot be haphazard as much as there is a lot of subjectivity, dynamism, and I mean there is no 1+1 2 formula to a greater extent because things will depend on the modalities of the case. Things will depend on the geography that we are working on, the kind of sensitivity that is there, the kind of agency or the entity that we are working on. Other things will depend on the engagement. But then at the end of the day, we need to ensure that we follow a laid down process. That is something that is very essential. Uh, Planning activities would contain or require to contain key elements of the one is knowledge of the relevant business environment. So if we are doing a forensic accounting engagement, let's say loss of we are asked to do a loss of profit claim assessment. In that scenario, we might not be thorough, or we might not have seen a particular chemical industry manufacturing in detail or in depth prior to that assignment or that engagement. But when we have gotten an engagement, we would want to understand and have knowledge of that relevant business as to what is that chemical manufacturing industry, what is the company manufacturing actually, what is the demand of that product, how it is. Need be, we might want to assess as to what is the skills and resources that would be required for us to undertake. So this is the point where we would want to gather all the nuances and nitty-gritty of that business, which can enable us to provide value and justify the efforts and justify the engagement that is provided to us. So having that knowledge is very important. Then what are the risk considerations? So as we've discussed in the 100 series, there are fraud risks that we need to evaluate. So all of that have to be done as a part of the process of the planning. So in when we are planning the assignment, we need to identify what are the risks involved. As Lokesh had already mentioned, that comes as the second step. Third, discussion with the stakeholders. So we need to communicate and discuss on a regular basis with the stakeholders. Stakeholders could be both primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders. So whoever it is, but at this point in time, we want to gather as much understanding, as much detailing of the case as required. So that is something that we ought to do. Fourth, technology into a example earlier. If we are doing a investigation into a potential employee misconduct, and we are asked to extract digital evidence from the electronic devices, in that case, we would want to know what is the kind of technology we would want to have in place. Uh, if we are doing a big data analytics on the some of the larger entities, and we want to do a fraud analytics on those data sets, what is the kind of technology that we would require? So these are some of the technology related aspects that we need to solve, or we need to have a clear understanding before we actually start the assignment. It should not happen that tomorrow we are still kind of deciding as to what is required, what is not, and we are kind of outplayed with the timeline and the kind of quality that we want to deliver. Fifth, resource allocation. Why resource allocation is again over here important is, first we need to do a skill and resource assessment. once we have an assessment as to what is the kind of team that would be required, so let's say if it's a securities market related case, or if it's a broking stock broker who is involved in the security market, or let's say if there is a AMC with respect to the securities market, what kind of understanding would be, so this is again synced with knowledge of the relevant business and environment. So over here we need to link all of these. We would also want to see what are the risks that are associated. So if it's a high profile case, if there could be, as again Lokesh was mentioning, there could be some kind of media sensitivity or some kind of threats coming in, so we would want our senior team members to be a part of it. We would want a close group to be working on such cases. So skills and resource assessment, what is the kind of talent, what is the kind of skill set required on this kind of assignment is something that we will need to assess. Post which, what, how and when do we allocate, as to if we are supposed to do some kind of field visits, or if we are supposed to do some kind of interviews, or if we are supposed to do, as we were mentioning, digital evidence extraction, at what point in time are we supposed to do that. We would, and then we would want to, again, I'm trying to say that all these 5 points are integrated, interlinked. We would want to discuss this with the stakeholders, that at this point in, so let's say if there are a couple of suspects, we would want to discuss with the stakeholders that gathering the digital evidence should be the first step. We do not want to start the assignment, and we don't want to tip off some of the suspects and be in a situation where we could give an opportunity of fiddling with the data from their end, or they would be transferring some data, or they would be potentially deleting the data. So we want to plan all of these aspects in a manner that we go fully armed, and we go full throttle when we actually start the execution. We want to also, so planning the assignment, as we read, so an engagement, we will have to break the engagement into multiple assignments. So one assignment is extraction of digital evidence, second assignment is review of the digital evidence which is received after the extraction. Third assignment could be visiting the field. Fourth assignment could be conducting the interviews. Fifth assignment could be review of the financial records, review of the purchase related data, or if it's a potential kickback allegation, then we would want to review all the transactions undertaken by that particular suspect. So we want to break the engagement into multiple assignments, and that's how we can go about it. Work methodology to be established, including hypothesis. So whatever we've discussed through Lokesh in the 100 series is something that we actually put into action. So while we have formulated those hypotheses, basis those hypotheses, we will define the work methodology. So if I remember correctly, Lokesh did specifically give an example as to there could be hypothesis as to what, how and when someone could have been involved in a conflict of interest case. So if we are forming a hypothesis as to someone is involved through a senior, or some family member is involved, so then accordingly work procedures and methodologies would have to be devised. So when I'm actually running through the digital evidence, I would actually map as to what, who are their family members, who are their close associates, and accordingly run my searches through those digital evidence in a manner that it syncs and aligns with my hypothesis. So that is what we put our 100 series into action over here. And relevant elements of the plan to be communicated to the identified stakeholders on a need to know basis. Because why need to know basis? So we, as I said, we do not want to tip off someone and put ourselves into a jeopardy of losing the evidence. Like let's say if we are planning to do some kind of mystery shopping, or if we are wanting to do some kind of visits at some of the various locations where there is material stored, or uh, some branches, or some of the uh, subsidiaries are working, or some of my agents are working. So I would not want to give out an indication saying that we will be doing this, uh, wherein something may tip someone off. So on a need to know basis, we will go about communicating that with the identified stakeholders. So that's about it from 310. 320 talks about evidence and documentation, as I referred this to be the heart and soul of the FAIS, where again evidence need to be reliable and relevant. Documentation needs to be appropriate and sufficient. So this is something at the core of this FAIS. If we read the standard, these are the four things talked in a lot of detail. But before we go into that, what is an evidence? What is documentation? So information written or oral or contained in electronic form. All of this would form part of the evidence. So discovery of the evidence, anything basically. It could be a small chit of paper lying, as Lokesh was saying, that we found something lying somewhere, and that's something that we're not able to find the other day. That's also an evidence. Something in electronic form, again an evidence. So um, uh, typically all of this written documentary evidence. So as per the Indian Evidence Act also, there are certain definitions over there. So all of that would form part of my evidence. Documentation, aggregate of all. So again, over here also, evidence is a subset of documentation. So aggregate of all evidences gathered along with the written record. So documentation is also to do with something that we have done. Each standard, if you read the compendium on FAIS, each standard at the end comes with a mandatory documentation requirement. Again, again back and forth repeating and kind of correlating it with what Lokesh had referred in his 100 series. If we had mentioned, if we have already discussed that fraud risks need to be noted down accordingly, my work procedures need to be formed accordingly, our hypothesis needs to be formed. So if we have noted down our fraud risks, potential fraud risks, that becomes our documentation. If we've formulated our hypothesis, that becomes our documentation. If we have identified and planned our work procedures in sync with all of this, that becomes our documentation. If we are taking an interview, the notes to that interview become our documentation. So documentation being again the larger tree or umbrella under which an evidence would fall into. So from that perspective, this is how they are distinct. And then now our focus is on obtaining reliable and relevant evidence. Both of these words, uh, in a way, very simple to understand, but technically very important, because uh, sources of the evidence. So if we say that, so we might be going through a lot of OTT series nowadays, couple of them related to law and investigation. And if we would find that a piece of evidence or an envelope is lying outside a door of the lawyer or the investigator, and then it becomes very difficult as to convincing the judge or informing the judge as to where did this come from. So we cannot go about it saying that it just appeared on my doorsteps, is what the essence is. So reliable sources, what is the source? If we are presenting, so we will discuss this when we go back to 510 on reporting results, but whatever we write in the report, be it any amount, be it someone's name, be it reference to any documentation, be it reference to an email, be it reference to a MOU, agreement, whatever, has to come with a source. I would not want to be into place where someone would want to question me saying, where did you get this from? So rather, we always mention based on the document, based on the agreement dated so and so, based on the email dated so and also give away the complete source. To that extent, if it's a digital evidence, there is a technical term hash value which needs to be retained, a chain of custody, as again Lokesh was mentioning. So sources need to be reliable, sources needs to be authentic, reliable, and ensure that evidence discovered is relevant. So we again do not want to be in a position or situation where we give away something that is not relevant to the so let's say if we are doing a again, I'll extend the example of we undertaking an investigation into an employee misconduct, and if we find something personal that is not related to the case out of the digital evidence, we do not want to go there presenting that evidence. That does not do any good to us. If there is something to do with their integrity, something like that, I mean, we do not want to go there. We want to let's say something to do with the financial information of that person, because if we are getting hands on the digital evidence, there is a lot of possibility that a person may have his or her bank statements or some other confidential private KYC information. So those things we would not want to present as an evidence if it's not relevant to the case. So that's how we want to make sure evidence is reliable and relevant to the objectives. That is how it will become admissible before the competent authority. Otherwise, as again Lokesh was mentioning, if there is any break into the chain of custody, if the source is not legitimate, if the source is something that we cannot prove, we cannot just say that any hearsay is evidence. I mean, second, there is a concept of secondary evidence. There is a different concept of having a eyewitness and all of that. But at the end of the day, we want to have source. We can't just say that some casual gossip was going on and that's how out of hearsay we are making that as the hero of our report and saying that this is the evidence. No, we cannot be doing that. uh, and then going about documentation, again, appropriate and sufficient. So uh, it should be in a position where it explains how the evidence was gathered, reviewed, recorded, stored, and analyzed also. So what was the process? As we said that, so let me run through the whole chain or the uh, steps. Let's say we have requested for an information requirement. We have requested for data through an information requirement list. So that explains that is how we have gathered, or we conducted information gathering discussions with the representatives of the company. So that explains how did we gather it. After receiving it, how did we review it? We did X analysis, Y analysis, we did some of the data analytics on it, we did run some searches on that data. All of that, how it was reviewed, how it was recorded, how did we eventually discuss it internally, what is the kind of analysis and what is the kind of conclusion that we drew, and how it is stored eventually. So we also need to have a quality control process into place. We will again come to review supervision as well as quality control standards. So there needs to be documentation for everything, not only something that is pertaining to the execution of the assignment, but throughout the engagement, what is it that we need to. So throughout all the assignments, what all documentation needs to be maintained. Uh, and last is ownership and custody of the documentation shall remain with the professionals. So again, let's say that we had appointed an expert. Uh, if we are the professional, we need to have the documentation which was done by the expert. If we are doing an assignment also, we need to have it. We cannot say. So we cannot say that, okay, it is not we that were given the engagement, it is another professional who was given the engagement. It is another professional who was given the actions that are required with respect to my assignment. not with respect to the complete engagement, but what scope was given to me by the other professional, what was the work and methodology that was adopted by me, what is the evidence gathered by me, what is reported by me, is something I would want to maintain as someone who was appointed as an expert or someone who was working on an assignment out of the complete engagement. And if I am in the position of someone who has got an engagement, I would want to have my own documentation plus documentation of my expert. So we cannot shift the owner's responsibility, is what the case is. We need to have ownership and custody of the documentation throughout. That is it from 320. Going about 330. Just a minute. Yeah. Just a minute. Yeah, 330, right? So conducting the work procedures. Now, again, as every standard has something very peculiar to that particular mandate or the requirement or how it is being defined. In this 330 conducting work procedures, something that is very imperative to note is the work procedures are divided into two phases typically. Phase 1, phase 2. Phase 2 is something which has to do uh, with the work procedures that we would do without engaging with the stakeholders, with minimum or very little interaction with the individuals involved, with this primary stakeholder or with the secondary stakeholder. So it is said behind the scenes where there is little interaction with the individuals involved. What are the kind of those work procedures? Let's say open source intelligence, public domain searches, financial analysis from the documentation available in the public domain. So let's say our records on the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, or let's say some of the filings done on the public websites, or let's say some of the litigation or the court cases that are available in the public domain. Let us say some of the tenders that are submitted by some of the agencies. So anything and everything that can be undertaken as a part of our work procedures, which is without the interaction or very little interaction with the primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders. And in phase 2, where there needs to, so my interview, our field visits, our procedures where we need to delve into the extraction of the data and conduct the documentation analysis and transaction testing with the primary stakeholders. Let's say Lokesh did discuss about engaging with the agencies. So engaging with the agencies is something that is part of the phase 2. Now, it is not necessary that every engagement or every assignment will have both these phases, that is phase 1 and phase 2. It could be that something or some engagement or some assignment is only to do with phase 1 and some engagement or assignment is only to do with phase 2. But we need to understand that there is a bifurcation between uh, phase 1 and phase 2, and that is how the standard then drives as to what are the kind of work procedures that we need to conduct. So it starts with developing the work procedures, consideration again over here of the fraud indicators, uh, testing the hypothesis, when are we supposed to change the plan, when are we supposed to engage with the experts. So developing work procedures needs to be in line with the agreed scope and objective. So we again do not want to get into a situation where something is not aligning with the scope or the objective. uh, Evaluate deploying relevant tools, techniques, processes, and gathering. So 310 and 330, planning and conducting the work procedures are step 1. Step 2 is what we can say. Once we have planned for the assignment, we then want to go about conducting those work procedures. once we know that, okay, we will need some of the forensic tools, some technology, then we would want to evaluate as to when do we want to do it, and then how do we want to actually go about doing it. If we've already identified what could be my fraud indicators, and that's how I have planned my work procedures, over here we would actually want to go about executing into identifying the work procedures that we want to do, and then eventually conducting those work procedures. So if there is a fraud indicator to say that there could be a leakage of cash at the time of collection, then what are the work procedures that we want to do? If there is a fraud indicator of uh, teaming and leading in my receivables and payables, then what are the work procedures that we would want to do? All of that would get covered over here. Consider the formulation and testing. So till the time we have only formulated the hypothesis, now is the time to test the hypothesis. How do we actually test the hypothesis? So one example for hypothesis that I have, which is very simple, is let's say I mean, most of us would be subscribing to newspapers at our home. Although in the digital world, a lot of us would have been subscribing to it. Not if not at the home, would be at the office. Let's say one fine morning, we wake up and say that we see no newspaper lying outside the door. Uh, what is it that we would think? We first thing that would probably come to our minds is, was yesterday a public holiday? And that's how the printing press is not operative, and that's how we do not have a newspaper. Second thought could be, probably did the newspaper vendor or their team member did not turn up today due to some of the other reason. And we would then actually conclude either of them. If it's not a holiday, we would just conclude saying that, okay, maybe he did not turn up. And if it was a holiday, we would say, okay, it was a holiday, so we do not have it. But what if there could be a third possibility? So it's only when the house help comes to sweep the floor is when the newspaper is identified under the shoe rack, which was not clearly visible. So, but we did not think of either on those lines, and that's how we would not be in a position to test the hypothesis. So if the hypothesis is that uh, my newspaper vendor did not turn up, we would want to go about calling that person, asking if actually it was delivered or not, and that's how we will test the hypothesis. If not, we would want to go about formulating another hypothesis. So if loans or borrowings are suspected to have been diverted or siphoned, okay, that is the hypothesis. How would I test them? I would call for all the bank statements. I would collate all the bank statements. Once we have collated the bank statements, we would map the fund flow. So fund coming in from X, fund going to Y, what was the purpose for which the funds had been disbursed by the bank, vis-a-vis what is the purpose for which the funds have been utilized, what is the documentation for the utilization, is the party related to the borrower or not, is the transaction at the arm's length or not. So this is something that we will do at this stage. We will prepare our work procedures on the basis of the hypothesis that is formulated. So any and every such work procedures that we can think of, or once the funds have been disbursed in my escrow account, funds have been paid out of my escrow account, there is a hypothesis that the funds have been returned in my some other account which is not a part of the consortium bank, or it's not a escrow account. So if that is a hypothesis, then I would want to test with the timelines that funds have been disbursed on X date. Within 2 days, the funds have been utilized to make a payment against so and so invoice to XYZ party. Did the funds within next few days through some other customer, which is potentially correlated with the vendor that we have made the payment to, returning the funds in terms of the receipts, in terms of my revenue, then there is a possibility that my same funds. So point is, we would want to test the hypothesis at this stage. Further, at this stage again, is there any need for change in the methodology? So there could be a change in the scope. So while we discuss that there is no 1 plus 1 2 formula, or now we have standards, but we would not, the standards would be a guiding material. We would not be in a position to say that in every particular employee misconduct case, following things needs to be done and would be applicable. So let's say while doing certain engagement, there is a roadblock that we hit. The scope is changed. The borrower is not cooperative. The whistleblower. So there have been instances where it was identified while we have started the engagement that there is some personal vendetta of the whistleblower. Then the whole suspicion, I mean, the whole premise of undertaking the investigation would change. Our work procedures would change. Let's say if there is a complaint filed with the bank that one of the branch managers has misutilized the funds, and the bank is appointed us, we are investigating into the case. Let's say couple of weeks down the line is only when we identify that the complainant and the bank manager are hand in glove with each other, and they are probably only exploiting the bank in order to extract the amount. All our work procedures would now have to take a 360-degree change. So at this stage, again, we would want to check if we need to make any change in the methodology. One, due to change in the work procedures, change in the circumstances. If, let's say, there is something to do with IP addresses, or there is something to do with, again, digital evidence coming in, or big data analytics. So we identify something, let's say we found deleted data. If you want to retrieve that kind of data, having gone into the assignment engagement, do we want to engage an expert? So again, need-based evaluation for all of this at this stage would again help us go about conducting the work procedures. Duly document the details. Again, we have already discussed this, the outcome, limitations faced, conclusion. So again, the whole chain. What did we do? What was the outcome? So if we've done, let's say there is an assignment, there is an engagement of understanding and doing a forensic review on the borrower's books of accounts, because the borrower has turned into an NPA and the account has been classified as a RFA, that is a red flagged account. In that case, phase one is something that we will any which ways do based on the data. So in this case, phase one would be data, any and every data set available with the bank. Bank has already extended the loan, so there would be an appraisal letter, there would be a credit note, there will be the documentation submitted, project report submitted if it's a term loan, by the borrower, financial statements, and a lot of things. So that would, evaluating that plus the data that is there in the public domain, plus the social media searches, plus my open source intelligence, public domain searches, litigation history, all of this becomes my phase one. If after phase one, we had to then go to the borrower and seek another information, additional data sets, clarification. If that is not coming out from the borrower and the borrower is not cooperative, then we would entail that these were the proposed work procedures, but the outcome is not coming out the way it should have because of the following limitations that are faced. And then we would have to disclaim as to what is the constraint in terms of giving out the conclusions that we could have drawn had this data. So in that case, our reporting becomes very important, that we had asked for certain details. Had following details been made available, we had following hypothesis based on which we were supposed to do following work procedures, which could have yielded following results. However, since it is not available, we are unable to conclude. Something on these lines. Similarly, in case of, let's say, an investigation. I mean, taking both examples, forensic accounting, investigation. So if it's an investigation, and let's say we come up with deleted data. So let's say we've got evidence of a laptop and a mobile, and when we prepare a timeline of the data that is available for a particular year or for a particular period of couple of months or 3 4 months, there is no data. What does that indicate? That there is some kind of uh, fiddling with the data that has happened. Most likely the data would have been deleted. If the deleted data is not in a position to be retrieved, then that is a limitation that is faced. Again, over there, our reporting becomes very important as to why was it important that that phase data had we gotten hands on. It was that period where the contracts were awarded. It was that period when the payments were being made. It was that period when there is a suspicion that some kickback has been received. It was that period when the particular employee or particular vendor was onboarded, something like that. So we will have to justify as to why was that data, why was that limitation. Had not been a limitation, would have been important. So all of that needs to be duly documented and eventually communicate with the. So certain times the engagement letter would want us to give uh, a regular periodical update. If not, it's a very good practice to put in place a quality or a review mechanism and set up some kind of standard to say that if something is going to go along for about, let's say, 1 week, I mean 1 month or 2 months, we would say that we will want to give you an update every week. Or if something is going to happen only for a fortnight, we would say that we will want to give you an update every 3 days or 4 days. So at least the primary stakeholders are aware of the situation that is there on the ground. And if there, so why is this again very important is there could be an additional information that they would have. So let's say if through our public domain searches, if through our evidences that we have gathered, so forth, there are certain names that are coming up, there are certain parties that we are getting to know, but because we are only being introduced into the case for a limited purpose or for a limited time, after a certain point in time, after the transaction has happened or after a certain allegation has happened, I mean after a certain misconduct has happened, we might not have a full view of the picture. In that case, if we are communicating that so and so is the evidence, so and so is the documentation that we have identified till date, they might be able to give us more insights that, oh, this is something that is very important and you might want to go ahead in this direction. Also, they would help us filter into saying, oh no, this is something that we have already approved of. Oh no, this is something we already know of, and that's where you do not want to put your efforts into. So that is where it becomes very important to communicate with the stakeholders about the progress. So that is to do with our 330 340. So interviews, again, something, do we have something in the chat? Okay, perfect. Okay, sure. So 340 with respect to the interviews. Now, interviews refer to a structured meeting with individuals for eliciting information. Now, where it is important for us to note that interviews are very separate. I mean, there could be, two, three different types of interviews. Something which is very, we would understand it to be an interview. Like, let's say, an information gathering discussion, or let's say, to seek certain clarifications. That would not be an interview. Interview is something which is a structured meeting for eliciting a certain part of information. So something that is planned in advance, something that we go in with a particular set of agenda, something that we go about with a proper plan, theme of questions that we want to ask. We properly document, we properly take an acknowledgement, we if there is a permission and consent, we go about recording it. And we would want to counter question, we would go in with certain facts and details at our end already, which we want to corroborate, or we want to kind of understand the approach of the individual. So all of this should only become an interview. So documentary evidence may need to be corroborated with statements from individuals. So let's say, the uh, primary thing is principle of natural justice to a good extent over here again. When we say documentary evidences may need to be corroborated. So what was the intent? What is it that is going to add up to the story is something that we would want to know. If we have identified a certain payment made to a certain party, and if we are suspecting that that party is having conflict of interest with that said individual, we might want to not just because there is a payment made to X party which is having potential conflict of interest with Y individual, we would not conclude saying that this is how it is. But we want to know the side of the story from the potential suspect or the person that we are feeling is kind of having the conflict of interest. So that is where having an interview is important, where we just do not conclude basis whatever documentation that we have or whatever transaction testing that we have undertaken, but we also give an opportunity of being heard to the other side of the table individual and gather because again over here there could be instances where we would get lot of additional insights, and that could turn the tables, or it may kind of disturb the person and help us further corroborate into the case. So either ways it can be helpful, and that's where this becomes an important part where there is a separate standard. Now what is it that is imperative, again essential, while we go about conducting the interviews is due preparation and planning. We do not want to start an assignment by just going about doing the interview basis the suspicion that we know of. It is again like we want to go full throttle, we want to go fully armed with all the information that we want to have before doing that kind of discussion as to when did the person join the company, what is the educational background, qualification, what is the family background, family members, what are the entities that person is connected with, what are the kind of transactions, roles, responsibilities in the company. Whatever we can gather, we want to gather and then only go about doing the interview. It's like more the merrier in terms of the touch points that we can talk about, the dots that we can connect, the questions that we can ask and test the individual as to uh, would that individual be giving out the, so we would want to even question something that we already know of, and that's how we will understand that how truthful or how honest or how transparent the other individual is or the interviewee is. So only if we have prepared well and planned for the interview, we would be able to do that, and that is somewhere towards the middle part of the engagement or towards the end. So again, then how do we actually develop the methodology which makes the interview very effective is important. So what are the themes that we want to touch upon? Again, there are a lot of do's and don'ts with respect to conducting the interviews. We again do not want to get into something that is very personal, something that is very sensitive. We do not want to, so we do not want to get into certain things which are not permitted. We do not want to give away any false promises. So we do not want to go in saying that if you help us or if you cooperate, you will get full immunity. I mean, we do not want to go on either of the extremes, and that's where we need to develop a proper methodology. We need to know the purpose as to why we are conducting the interview, not just because someone is there on my suspect list, is because I, or someone is just because someone is a KMP, let me just go and interview that person. No, that will not help or aid in undertaking the investigation. Conduct professionals conducting or participating in the interview shall maintain confidentiality. So, needless to say, any forensic accounting investigation assignment engagement requires us to uphold to the utmost confidentiality standards, uh, and we need to be very, very particular about this. Uh, and so it goes with the interviews. So we do not want to. We are, again, there is a difference between an interrogation and interview. So we do not want to wear that interrogation hat of what we see for the likes of ACP Pradyuman, and just start going. So as Lokesh again had mentioned, right, that we are only having a particular scope, we are having a particular expertise, we are having only certain authority, we do not want to cross those borders. So that is where it is important to stay within those boundaries and undertake our work procedures. Interviews shall be conducted within the defined scope. See, again, the same thing is mentioned. Any interviews considered necessary by the professionals. But so there could be moments where we are not provided with access to someone. Okay, like if we are doing an assignment, if we are doing an engagement, we feel that certain funds have been remitted to XYZ employee, and we feel that there was no need for those funds to be remitted. In that case, if we want to have an interview, if we want to have an interview with that individual, and if the company feels that no, we do not want to do that right now, because if we do that, there will be information spread in the organization. Let's say if those are large entities, listed entities, things could affect a lot of other things. There are a lot of ancillary factors. So in that case, we would want to specify that, saying that we wanted to conduct interviews, but we were, due to whatever reason, we could not do that, and that's how we are limited to that extent. So that is also something that we want to clearly bring out in the reports or when we document the interview conducting part. Then there are a lot of other things with respect to the do's and don'ts of the interviews, like if we are taking an interview, uh, either we take a statement as to whatever we have discussed, noted, and then take a signature from that person, or we can request that person in the interviewee that we will send across minutes or notes to this interview, and we request you to acknowledge that. All of that becomes a evidence as to what we've said. We need to give free access to the interviewee to the washroom. I mean, have bio breaks in between. Offer proper water and food at regular intervals. We do not want any spy cams and things like that. All of that again makes breaches the privacy, and that's how something that we are trying to do, which is actually going to aid our work, will actually go against us and say that we are indulging into something that is not legal. So without consent, if we start to record certain things, and then if that thing is identified, that would come against us rather than helping us. So rather could actually worsen the whole case if we think of also doing certain things. With permission, we can of course record. It should be a professional environment. We are not supposed to take, we don't want to, of course we want to keep certain things discreet, or we do not want things to be known into the organization. Let's say that we don't want that it is informed, or we are using the conference rooms for conducting various interviews. Then we will want to request the entity to book up some conference room at some other professional setup, or a hotel, or some other business area, but not having such discussions at certain cafes and things like that. So the professional environment, the way in which we go about undertaking the interview is important also. So that is it about 3 40 350 talks about review and supervision. Again, there is a I mean, there is a difference. As much as we would want to use them interchangeably, but there is a specific distinction as to what is a review, what is supervision, and how we, as someone who's gotten an engagement, are supposed to do both, review the work and supervise also, and how those are different. We will go about it in this standard. So review would be an examination of planning, work performed, and documentation of the work. So over here, we are not only going to review the findings, or we are not only going to review the report. It's not that only because we've gotten an engagement, we are only going to review the final conclusion, but we are going to review everything, starting from my planning stage to what all work procedures we have performed. How have we gone about doing the documentation of the work procedures performed? What is the evidence that is gathered? So all of that would come into review. Supervision. So to that extent, if and when do we want to change certain things, all of that would come into my review part. Supervision, oversight of team, and provision of overall guidance. So that is more to do with the execution of work procedures part, where we would want to supervise the working of the team and provision of overall guidance in the execution part. So to some extent, or for easier understanding, we would say that review is again a broader umbrella where we would do review everything, and supervision is something that we do with respect to the team that we have. So when and how much do we review, what do we supervise, is something that is left to the best judgment with respect to the periodicity and the extent. So depending on the case, the fraud indicators, the hypothesis, the sensitivity of the case, the quantum, materiality, all of that, we would then go about deciding what is the periodicity and extent of the review and supervision. Something required on a week. So let's say we took an example of uh, we having to give an update every week. So then it is imperative, if we are supposed to give an update to the client every week, we are supposed to review the work also prior to that. We are supposed to supervise every 2 days in order to have a proper review prior to the submission of the update, and then only we can send out an update. So that's how we will have to make the application of best judgment for the periodicity and extent. If let's say something, so how do I give an example? Example is if let's say we have deployed an expert at to do a certain assignment into as a part of the engagement. Okay, then how much experience, qualification does the expert have, and then how much would it warrant for our review or our supervision? Similarly, if there is a comparatively junior or comparatively budding professional or a team member that is there in our team, then we would want to have an extended review or have a constant supervision on the work. So this is very dynamic in its own way, but we need to be skeptical into how do we go about doing it. While nature of review and supervision will vary, the professionals shall exercise oversight on activities being performed, of course, review the plan during the course of the assignment to evaluate if so. As I said, if do we want to change something is something that we do over here. And this is not only from a working perspective, but let's say our scope is getting changed, then we need to accordingly mandate or update our engagement letter, accordingly have a discussion on our commercials, accordingly have to modify with the timelines, accordingly we'll have to see if we do need an expert on the case or not. So things like that have to come into play in the review and supervision part. So all of it is interlinked, because 350 will then go on to 310, that is planning, and 330, that is conducting work procedures. So while we review and supervise, only then we will get to know on these aspects as to if something is significantly changing, We want to immediately communicate. We want to highlight it and accordingly change the other ancillary dependent circumstances on that particular significant change. Work procedures conducted and the working papers prepared to be reviewed. So it's not only, as we discussed, we are not only here to review the final report, but the work procedures that are conducted, papers that are prepared. So the base, from the base to the final product, is something that we need to have complete control on, and identify matters for consideration. So let me give you an example. Um, if you are doing a case, and if let's say deleted data has come into our knowledge, or let's say if some make or break evidence has come into our understanding, then we would not want to wait for that weekly update to be given. If there are certain matters which require complete consideration at certain point in time, we want to immediately do that. That is something that will help while we do a review or supervision. uh, so that's it from the 350 side. 360, again, testifying before the competent authority. This standard is uh, technical in the sense that there are a lot of terminologies which are again very well identified and clarified in the standard itself, as to what is an adjudicating authority, what is a competent authority, what is a testimony, who are testifying professionals, what is proceedings. Uh, uh, so where would investigating agencies form part of? So an investigating agency could be would be part of the competent authority. A regulatory body, it could be an adjudicating authority, or else it would be a competent authority. So competent authority is more or less the umbrella, and that's where the standard also says testifying before the competent authority. So eventually an adjudicating authority would also form part of the competent authority. So proceedings, testing. So someone who provides a testimony would become a testifying professional, and testifying refers to providing information and evidence to competent authorities pursuant to legal proceedings. So there was one question which Lokesh has already answered, but coming to that, it says that we as test. So who can be a testifying professional is also defined in this standard. So not someone from the team, or not an expert who has done only a part of the engagement can come up as an expert, come up to give an expert testimony or testify against the testify against the competent authority for the whole engagement. The person who is a testifying professional needs to have been on the case from the starting, or from the initial phase toward till the very end, would have actively participated in all the work procedures, in the review, in the supervision, has been interacting with the stakeholders, has been responsible for undertaking discussions, has been important and relevant, I mean, key team member in undertaking any interviews. So only then would someone be able to testify. So that is the first step. And then what do we testify is the next step. We testify only on the evidence that is gathered. We are not here to give an opinion. We are not here to give an opinion as to guilt or misconduct, or innocence of a particular entity or a particular individual. We are supposed to give an expert testimony, testify only on the evidence documentation that we have gathered. We could be asked as to what was the source, how did you find this, what did you find, why do you feel so and so has happened. So we would actually be questioned as to whatever we've written in the report, basically. That is where having a relevant and reliable source, a reliable evidence is important. That is where having sufficient and appropriate documentation is important, because this is the place where we could be cross-examined by the counterparty, and this is where we would want to make sure that there is a supporting documentation or a reference or a source to any amount, any particular modus operandi, any particular name, any particular place, whatever is mentioned in the report. So, the testifying professional, what is the requirement? So, testifying professional shall be independent and objective in approach and ensure that no conflict of interest is taking on the role prior to accepting an engagement. So, I think the question also was that if, let's say, an investigating agency or a regulatory body appoints someone as an expert testimony or as an expert witness into a case, then agreed, it could be someone else would have done the assignment, or someone else would also have done some kind of forensic. And let's say in an arbitration matter, in an arbitration matter, if a professional is specifically appointed by the arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators to do an independent and objective review, then we are supposed to be independent. We are not. We will have to check for all the principles that Lokesh again has discussed. Objective. We will have to go about things in a very neutral, without any bias, independent manner. So before taking up the role, we need to assess and be very conscious of that. If there is any conflict, it is the duty that we should, the testifying professional's duty shall be towards the competent authority and not towards the client. So, let us say that we've done some assignment engagement, and let's say if the fees would have been paid by the client, and in that case, we are supposed to further give a expert testimony, or we need to testify. In that case, it is our duty that we are not inclined towards the client. Rather, we are very neutral towards the competent authority who has entrusted us with this responsibility. And third, what again the question was, and we've already discussed, that we stick to the facts that we've gathered. Then testifying professionals shall be actively involved. Again, as I said, would have to. There are certain parameters that we would have to tick before we kind of offer our services as a expert testimony. And the testifying professional shall adhere to the statutory provisions of our deposition as per the applicable law, and adhere to the relevant standards issued by the. So again, whatever regulatory framework that we are getting into, we will have to adequately adhere to those standards. So this brings us to an end on the 300 series. Now what's left in store for us is the 400 and the 500 series. 400, as I had already mentioned, these are some of the specialized areas that have been separately dealt with in the standards, because those are more or less touching upon any or most of the forensic accounting and or investigation engagements. That is why there is a specific standard on these three areas, as well as there are implementation guides following them. So 410, talking about data analysis. In data analysis, I mean, everything is getting covered. There are small terminologies with respect to data repository. I mean, every smaller point has been defined in terms of how do we go about gathering the data, and then going about the analytics side. How do we present that data? Evidence gathering in digital domain. Again, what is digital data, how do we gather the evidence, how do we maintain the chain of custody, which is very important over here. And 430 loans or borrowings, uh, because there are a lot of financial investigations, financial frauds with respect to the banking sector, with respect to the related party transactions, where loans or borrowings become a key element. So that's where there is a specific standard again defined for this area. Uh, 410 talks about applying data analysis, and the objective over here is to examine the data to analyze and discover patterns of irregular or inconsistent activities or other anomalies. So basically, outliers, any trend, any pattern, or the outliers. So there are a lot of simple and very effective data analysis techniques. Let's say just by doing a relative size factor analysis, we would come to know that what is the highest and the second highest transaction with a particular party in a particular general ledger or in a particular vendor. Uh, and that's how we can come to know as to why is there a considerable difference between the highest and the second highest transaction. If those fall in the considerable range, fair enough. But let's say there is, so uh, I'm giving an example. Let's say there is a particular payment made to a vendor for, let's say, 60 lakhs, 70 lakhs, 80 lakhs, 2 crores, 3 crores. And then there are a lot of small payments of, let's say, 30, 40, 50,000 within the range of 1 lakh. There could be two possibilities. Let's say there was a car purchased and then there are AMC charges, or let's say there was a machine that was the machine that was purchased, procured, and then there are a lot of AMC charges, or let's say service fees, or let's say replacement of parts, or there could be a one-off transaction that we could catch hold of through this analysis. There is a there is a there is a simple test of doing a same. So if you want to see, there are same names, same contact numbers, same email IDs, same tax registration numbers across different vendor names or customer names, or same contact details against certain different employees. Those are the tests which will help us identify if there is any trend. So let's say a Benford law could be one of the tools or one of the techniques to undertake a data analysis. So these could be some of the very basic ones, and then we go about, to the extent we formulate some of the queries and we use SQL and things like that to to map the fund trail, to review the large database, to identify outliers from the big data. So that is the objective of this FAIS. The result of data analysis work is to use to support the hypothesis and observations which may form part of the conclusion. So whatever hypothesis that we formed, these, as we said, 330 talks about the work procedures. So in the work procedures, as and when there is application of data analytics, data analysis, we are supposed to test the hypothesis to that extent over here. The key terms are, as I said, data analysis and many other process related terms. Uh, how do we actually go about doing this is, first we need to prepare a data analysis plan. So we will run through this through one single example. Uh, let's say we are supposed to do a fund trail exercise, which is typically a forensic accounting exercise. Establish that it is a typical forensic accounting exercise, that is fund trail mapping or end utilization, as we could understand easily. So we will have to actually plan that exercise, not that we will just go about that exercise. So we will have to plan as to how will we gather those bank statements. How will we put our quality control procedures in place? What are the essential elements that we need to fulfill the objectives? So pre-processing also, these all of these terms have been defined: data acquisition, data validation, data preparation. So we will have to call for that data. Whom do we call that data from? Not from the entity, but from the source, that is the bank. How do we call for that data? We would want to call that form data in an editable format. So let's say in a spreadsheet format or a CSV format, rather than it being in a document format or a TXT format or a PDF format or a printed scanned format. So that's how we will want to acquire the data. How do we actually validate that data? We would actually want to check the running balances. Year on year, we would want to check the closing balances to check the integrity of the data, because it could so happen that page numbers, missing period. So before undertaking the analysis, because this is something where we could get lost in the loop as to where did we go wrong. So before any such vulnerability, we would want to put in place certain process, that plan is strong enough that we chart out all these minute aspects, acquire the data from the right source, validate the data from in a proper manner as to by applying lot of checks and balances. Then in data preparation, let's say we have gathered of 3 different banks or 4 different years, we want to put a primary key. We want to put a primary key, secondary key, so that we know as to what is the source of that particular data, particular bank's name, particular account number, something that we would want to make the data symmetrical. So before we start the analysis, we want to prepare for that data to be all aligned. If there are certain columns in a certain bank's account statement, and there are certain formats in terms of the number, the debit is so certain statements have a single amount column with a debit credit separate column, and some would have a debit column, some would have a credit amount column. So we would want to clean that data and prepare in a manner that we are able to effectively undertake our analysis. Make sure that the integrity of the data is upheld. So we do not want to. So what do? We actually keep a copy of the original data, then work on the we keep the original data intact, we copy that and work on the copies of the original data. What is the data boundary? As we said, we want to limit ourselves within the boundary, within the scope, so that it should not happen that we our evidence, our work is tested in terms of the admissibility and inadmissibility against the competent authority. So this is through an example I'm trying to correlate as to what this standard talks about. Undertake the process. Now then we once we have acquired, validated, prepared, ensured integrity, then we go about performing in line with the objective. Again, map this with the hypothesis. Hypothesis was that funds would have gone from XYZ party to a particular vendor which is having conflict of interest. So then actually then go about the work procedures in a manner of identifying that name. If there is a hypothesis of funds having moved out in a certain time frame, then accordingly perform the analytics. Something again very imperative and conceptual in terms of understanding the data analysis. This is again important in the next 420 that we will discuss. Test of reproducibility. What does that mean? Test of reproducibility is if the database on which we have worked and if the work procedures that we have done are applied by some other professional, the other professional should also yield the same result on the same data by following the same work procedures. So we have to ensure that we do things in a manner that it can be exactly reproduced as it is, and results can be exactly same in terms of the reporting in an effective form. So that is point 3. Point 4, undertake measures again, over here, data confidentiality, archival and retrieval, we need to make sure that the originals are archived. As we discussed in the digital domain, the test of reproducibility is proven through hash values, as we say. Hash values is a unique identification number for a simple understanding for the original data or the source data. So that tomorrow, when someone, let's say the suspect or someone else, accuses us of having fiddled with the integrity of data, or we having manipulated the data, and we have kind of created an evidence, or we have kind of destroyed an evidence, or we have kind of done something wrong with the data, it is then when the hash value will come into play, that we will say that okay, you may go ahead, test this hash value and see what is coming out of it. It should be exactly same as what we did, and it is exactly the same result that we are able to get. So uh, we want to archive certain things. How do we when do we want to retrieve it? The assignment team as a whole should possess. So again, we need to ensure that adequate expertise and experience is there with the team uh, in terms of the techniques. And so data cleaning is also not very easy. I gave an example which was very simple in terms of we gathering the data as it is in the required format, but not every time do we get that. So and if we are wanting to make a lot of in-house RPA driven, so RPA driven or SQL driven analysis, uh, macro driven analysis, then we would want a technical team also to assist to that extent. So 410 talks about that. 420 digital domain. Three terms again over here: digital domain, digital evidence, and e-discovery. As most activities and transactions shift to digital domain, the evidential matter uh, now required to complete FAIS engagements needs to be gathered in a new way, and that is electronic gathering, and that is what is e-discovery. So, how do we go about this again? Uh, like we said in the interview part, like we said in the data analysis part, that we need to plan for it. We need to have a process for it. So again over here, what to from starting from the serial number of that digital asset, starting from the source, starting from the make model, if it's an electronic device, if it's a server, and then we will actually document the whole process as to how did we do it, what was the size of the data, what folders were, what is the metadata, what is the hash value, what is the chain of custody that was maintained. So, and for this overall understanding of the information system is also important, and then linking it with the digital domain and the data with respect to that. Gathering of evidence can be conducted by those who have requisite skills. So over here, need be, we might have to engage with an expert, appoint an expert. Evidence gathered in the digital domain shall comply with the domestic laws. So again over here, there is an interplay now with the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, DPDP Act coming into play. There is a lot of deliberation discussion as to how will this impact on the forensic digital evidence recovery review work procedures. The rules are about to come out for the DPDP Act, and soon we will have a lot of clarity as to how are we actually complying with the domestic laws concerning the privacy and concerning the regulations around it. Where necessary, the professional shall deploy appropriate tools. So, needless to say, uh, we need to deploy tools wherever required in terms of maintaining the high standard of deliverable. Just a minute. So, from 4 420, we move to 430, that is loans or borrowings. Over here, three terms are defined: loans, borrowings, and misutilization of funds. So, terms such as diversion, siphoning, things of those sort are not mentioned here, but would more or less form part of the misutilization of the funds. That is something that we need to know. Loans or borrowings, again, internal, external, it would cover everything. Not that any financial institution or NBFC, but if it's a related party transaction, again those would be covered. So and then this would be more to do with the disputed transactions of the loan. So with respect to the interest, with respect to the repayment, with respect to the use and the objective of the particular loan or borrowing, as to the negative covenants of the agreement, all of that, if any of those terms are disputed, then that will form part of this standard. The subject matter of these engagement generally require an examination. So three: contractual, statutory, and regulatory. So from a contract perspective, what was it that it was meant for? What were the submissions to be made? What was the regular update that was to be given in terms of the monitoring? What was the stock record? What was the hypothecation, mortgage? From a statutory perspective and a regulatory perspective, we need to see what are the RBI guidelines, what are the laws of the land in terms of documentation from a legal perspective of mortgage, hypothecation, lien, charge that is created on the assets. Do we need to check on the SAR side? Do we need to check on the registrar's data? So all of that we need to require a detailed examination on these three aspects. The professional shall identify the nature of dispute. First of all, before starting, we would want to understand what is nature of dispute. Primary stakeholders' expectation and agree on the scope. So we cannot initiate without these three things. That is understanding the nature of the dispute. So is it because the borrower is not repaying the loan? Is it because a regulatory agency has put up an investigation for misrepresentation of the books of accounts in terms of the related party loans and borrowings? So we need to understand what is the nature, what is the expectation, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to do a fund trail and identify the end utilization of the funds? Are we supposed to check on the arm's length of the loans and borrowings in terms of the interest or in terms of any preference given? So let us say, again, Lokesh did refer to PUFE transactions in the IBC scenario, right? Preferential, undervalued, extortionate credit, and fraudulent transactions. So then there also loans or borrowings come into play. But then the primary stakeholder, that is the resolution professionals, expectation is completely different. That is to identify if those transactions are preferential, undervalued. So if a loan or borrowing in that scenario is the interest rate preferential, have we overpaid it to the related party or have we under collected it from the related party? We've repaid the loan to a related party but not repaid to our external lenders. So what is it that we want to actually identify? An objective is something that we need to understand, and then the scope and requirement. So that will specifically help us understand certain things. Any areas specifically agreed to be out of scope? Again, this is not only with respect to this, but throughout that, if something is explicitly mentioned to not form part of the scope, that also needs to come out very clearly. While compliance with legal, regulatory, and contractual requirement is a key aspect, professionals' work procedures, specific methodology, and work procedures for asset tracing shall be considered, especially to identify. So, asset tracing is separately defined, and a paragraph has been provided in the standard where we go about doing a lot of public domain related checks, lot of open source intelligence, lot of charge related documents, site checks, all of that to understand what are the kind of assets that someone would possess. So before, let's say, initiating a litigation, or before, let's say, going about further in terms of the dispute of the loans or borrowing, there would be an asset tracing that would be required. Or in terms of the fund flow, if the funds have moved from one entity to other, there is a suspicion of misutilization, then what were the kind of assets that those were procured, or what was the investment that was made, uh, is something that we would want to know. uh, and that is why that is specifically to identify the diversion or siphoning. So from that amount, or from that fund, what is it that was diverted, what is it that was siphoned? So diverted could be something that is for the overall benefit of the company, but not within the objectives of the loans or borrowings. And siphoning is something more to do with the personal use of those funds. So professionals shall make reasonable efforts to collect additional information from other sources which can be helpful. So, whatever other regulatory bodies or submissions and filings that are there, if we can gather, that will help. So, that is it from 400 series. We are also almost on time to complete within the stipulated limit. Indicative list. So this is an indicative list of what could be the dispute. So it could be starting from if the loans were so if documentation itself that was given was not correct, and that is how loans were granted, and we are supposed to undertake a review for that. Again, that could be one of the dispute. Assets offered, I neither own nor in the existence, or those that duplicate charge has been created, things like that. Funds not utilized, we discussed. Misutilized in a fraudulent manner. Borrower submits falsified documents related to fund utilization. So the certificates that are to be given, the kind of submission in terms of the invoices or the parties to whom payments have been given, or the certificates that are given. If any of those are falsified during the regular course of monitoring and submissions, disputes related to timely repayment. That's also again something that we have discussed. So there's an indicative list where we could be appointed and undertake a review. So this series, 500 and 600 series, 510 on the reporting and 610 on the quality control. We'll straightly dive into 510. So this is very dynamic. Reporting is very dynamic subject. I mean, the FAIS does not give a specific format, okay, that we have to strictly follow specific format for a certain engagement assignment. No, but it gives away key elements is what which is very important. So it starts from the title, addressee, scope, objective, methodology, findings, executive summary, whether FAIS were applied, not applied, to what extent limited, limitations, assumptions, disclaimers, conclusion, circulation. So all of that are the key elements that the FAIS defines, and what all forms part of those key elements. So one, the essence is that it needs to be a written report to the primary stakeholders. Reporting results of the work procedures completed and the findings is the concluding part. So this is a concluding part of the assignment. One engagement may include multiple assignments, so multiple reports. So a particular engagement, as we've discussed, could have a lot of assignments, and that's where there could be multiple reports also. So now we'll go into what are the key provisions. So it has to be precise, unambiguous, addressed to the primary stakeholders and share with the other stakeholders if required and otherwise permissible. So let's say we are doing an internal investigation, then my primary stakeholders would be the board or the audit committee and committees, whistleblower committee, all of that. But then if it's another engagement where even an investigating agency is involved, or if the police is also investigating and FIR is also filed, then would we we will have to go back and see the scope, we will have to go back and see the terms of the engagement, and then we will be able to mention that this could be shared with the relevant regulatory authority or investigating agency with an explicit written consent and things like that. Third is something that we discussed. Uh, uh, Again, if the format is already mandated by the stakeholder, then we follow the format where the mandate requires. So, if there is a requirement to give a draft report, we can go ahead doing that, but we need to specifically mention as to what was the discussion in the draft stage. Sorry, what were the comments and responses received, and we want to incorporate that. So what are the assumptions made, whether any limitations were faced by the professional, those need to clearly come out. uh, the very big and important aspect is we are not supposed to give away any opinion. We are not here to pass any judgment on the guilt or innocence. But as Lokesh also again repeating the same thing, we are doing a fact finding exercise. We are doing an evidence gathering exercise, and we want to stick to that. So if someone asks us to report as to if the account is to be classified as fraud or not, we would not go ahead doing that. If someone asks us, so without doing an interview, without knowing complete circumstances, if someone asks us that you report that so and so person has undertaken the has is guilty of misconduct and should be charged with so and so so and so so and so offenses, no, that is something that we are not supposed to do. Now if there are circumstances where the report could not, as I said, the borrower is not cooperative, or if we hitting a roadblock, then we want to specifically mention what is the status, what are the limitations, what was the reason, what are the steps that we could have taken if the data was provided, what is the result that we could have yielded basis the lot of hypotheses those were found. So all of this, and of course the report needs to be sent out in a reasonable time frame as per the engagement terms. uh, these are the key elements. I think we already covered title, addressee, distribution list again as we discussed. Uh, Scope, objective, approach, executive summary. Okay, if we are using the expert, we've already discussed this, but of course, in the report, this has to specifically come out as to use of the work of an expert. What was the scope of the expert? What is it that they have? What are the work procedures that they have performed? What is it that they have concluded? And if we are not agreeing to that extent, inform as to why we are not agreeing and what was it that it is their stand and what is it our stand. Fact that the assignment, yeah, okay. Any material departures from the FAS as we discussed, findings, sources, relevant matters around that, assumption, limitation, disclaimer, and conclusion. So that's about the key elements. The last part to today's discussion with respect to quality control. uh, so there are certain 3-4 aspects that we want to quickly understand as to how FAIS is mandating us to uphold the quality. So we need to make sure that three things: there are right kind of people, right robust processes, and quality control system in place. If these three are followed with a systematic and disciplined approach, we will definitely be able to deliver a quality output. So again, this all goes back to the planning, the conducting work procedures, need for an expert, all of this with respect to the right people. That is how we will make an assessment of the resources, resource allocation, requirement of an expert, review and supervision of the professional in terms of the guidance, in terms of the review. processes, we said we need to have a detailed plan for data analytics. We need to have a detailed plan. We need to have a approach and methodology for the interviews. We need to have a proper methodology and approach for the loans or borrowings. We need to have certain things in the digital domain. So if we have right kind of processes followed by quality control, what do we mean by quality control system? So it is a system where there is a proper competency development plan. So in house, we as a team, we need to be evolving. We need to be undergoing a lot of trainings and need to equip ourselves with the evolving trends. We need to have the right kind of technical capabilities, and we need to have a quality control review. So we need to set up inside the system, we need to have a review framework that sets out timely evaluation of the work performed. And the fourth and the last aspect is with respect to the CP. So we would want to engage into, we would have to engage into certain CPERs if we are doing certain engagements, and that's how we will make sure that we are staying up to date and relevant with the professional and the emerging trends around the FAI ecosystem, if we can say so. So I think with this, we've come to an end in terms of covering all of the standards of the 3, 4, 5, and 600 series. We are about time in terms of the limit as well. And once again, before concluding, would like to thank the chairman, vice chairman, DAB, the whole team from the secretariat. Again, extend hearty thanks to Lokesh for covering the couple of series earlier, Vipulji for moderating the session, and all the participants that we had, and the questions, so being very participative. Thank you so much once again for this opportunity, and would hand it over to Vipulji for opening the forum for any questions and then eventually concluding the session.
Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, Joji, we have this question with us.
Yeah.
Why do we need FAIS when we are doing the same work in audit? Like, we also collect evidence, detect fraud, and we report to the board. So, what is the need of FAIS?
Correct. So, from a statutory perspective, let's say if we are doing a statutory audit, so it is 143.12 which comes into play in terms of reporting fraud. I mean the guidelines with respect to reporting fraud, but the essential difference is in the famous proverb that we are always taught of when we've started studying audit, when we started chartered accountancy, that auditors are watchdogs and not bloodhounds. So as an auditor, as a statutory auditor, we are here to give an opinion. Again, two things again differentiating. There we give an opinion on the true and fair view of the financial statements. We are not going with a suspicion. We are not going there to collect evidence. Okay, that is a part of the essays and the SAEs and the relevant engagement standards, SQCs, but we are there, we are giving an opinion. There we are only reporting fraud under 143.12. We are doing that, but to a limited extent, and the approach is completely different. The premise of doing it, the objective is completely different. Over here, we actually, in an investigation, we are neutral. We are not biased, but we go with an approach where that is bloodhound. We go to identify evidence particular to a certain transaction. So audit again is for an entity. Investigation, forensic accounting could be particular to a certain instance, scenario, case, individual, transaction, anything. So I believe these are two very starking differences, and that's why this being very. And then if someone is I mean, not testifying. If someone is giving an opinion on the books of accounts, that person would not be the, again, that person's independence would be hampered if the same person is doing some kind of a forensic review for the regulatory agency on the same entity. So that's how, again, there is need for an independent forensic professional. If an investigating agency wants to undertake a forensic review on the entity, it's not the statutory auditor who will go against their own work in terms of doing the review from a forensic perspective, where they have given a true and fair. So if there have been cases, it's out there in public, NFRA has given certain reports. If there are cases of misrepresentation, if there are cases of manipulation, things like that, even auditors have been held responsible. So I mean, typically, again, from another perspective, if I look at maker-checker concept, a maker cannot again be a checker. So that's how I believe these are some of the thoughts that I could immediately gather.
Joji, please accept our sincere thanks from behalf of the board to have taken such an elaborative session. I would like to compliment over here that as spices lend different varieties and flavor to the food, so is our audit vocabulary. And you took upon that really well. This was so informative to have known the difference between engagement and assignment, review and supervision. Taking up examples from daily routine life, I still can understand from the fact on the newspaper example. So these are all what expert professionals can help the layman professionals understand about various topics. So it was quite elaborative, and please accept our sincere thanks on behalf of the board for the same.
Thank you so much.
I would also like to extend thanks to the board for organizing such seminars. Our chairman, C.H. Charanjot Singh Nandaji, who is currently the Central Council member, also heading the Committee on Financial Markets and Investors Protection and the Committee on Information Technology of SAFA, and was also the vice chairman to the Board of Internal Audit and Management Accounting. And at last, thanks to the beautiful audience, the member participants, for having joined us for this significant and informative webinar. Thank you very much, and wishing you all a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Vipulji. Bye. Good night.